Well, come back to Ami's house. Michael,
You had a fun weekend.
well, it happened. Went back into the Lion's Den for round 2 of Candace Owens, and this will be our post game of that. Now, this involved, as you saw, a Israel-Palestine debate with two Jewish comedians, me and Dave Smith.
Did she change the title of the video from the Great Jewish Debate to the Great Debate?
I think,
Or was that just in a tweet?
I think it was just a tweet. I don't think the
okay.
YouTube thing, which was funny because the whole time this is not about Jews, it's about Israel, and then it's the Great Jewish Debate. But listen, a lot of people, you could say like it's tokenism having two Jews just duke it out, or some people say, and the anti-Semites in the comments came out right away saying, why are two Jews discussing this? Where's the Arab representative or whatever? But there's something to be said, first of all, about the staging of it all. There's an interesting element to that, and also, like, I think in a way of trying to say you can't say there's an element of this that's anti-Semitic here if the two of us are talking as Jews about this topic. So that's kind of fair in a sense, because I think it's just obvious. I'm a Jewish comedian who's not a professional historian or scholar, and I don't claim to be. And Dave is first and foremost a comedian who's Jewish. And I think I'll say something about him from the get-go, and then I want to get your response to it and your feedback. But Dave is passionate, very well-informed, and well-intentioned, which makes him very formidable. And he's very experienced on like the debate side of things, debating impassioned intellectual topics, foreign policy. That I'm interested in that stuff as well, but to the extent that he's really in that world, very much so. So I wanted to go in kind of curious about his positions on things, and I know it was inevitably going to be a debate. So, yeah, what'd you think? How'd I do?
Well, you want to start there because I want to hear how you think how you think you did before I tell you how I think you did.
Okay, I'll give you the sort of
How do
behind
you
the scenes of what's going on while it's going on.
Well, there's two parts of it. There's the what's it like to be someone who did that and then eats dinner with his family, like just for personally what that experience is like, and then how do you think you did as a debater?
Right
here. Well, so start with the debate.
What's it like to be that, or how was the what's?
Start with what was it just like to it went up on Friday.
Right.
Shabbos started an hour or so later. You turn your phone off, I assume.
The most anxiety part of it is not knowing, in terms of my perception of how it went in real time, with how I actually did. Not knowing that, and that waiting period was pretty nerve-wracking because I was like, wanted to make sure I first of all, you want to make sure you do well in these big public forums, but also that I felt like I did the best that I could do in a sense. And I'll say this, like with these kinds of conversations and these debates, the hardest thing is you want to be prepared, but you don't want to be performative. And you want to engage in the best way you can in real time and be present to what's actually going on when you're interfacing with somebody. And you don't want to make this mistake of, which I see all the time, and you see it constantly. It's different when you're doing a short form media hit and you kind of have like a 2 cents to get something out. But when you're engaged in a long form discussion, you want to talk to the person who's actually there and argue with the person who's actually there, and not say, okay, he said that, so what am I supposed to say now? Which is sort of this inevitable thing when you have sort of a conclusion that you believe in, but you also don't want to be performative, and you want to address what's there, but you also don't want to you want to make the case as well, right? So you want to make sure you leave no stone unturned while also being present in the actual conversation. That's really challenging. And so you have to track everything that's going on, and because it's virtual, people have to be able to speak uninterrupted to the extent that they can, and you have to track something. So if somebody says something that you're like, that's really objectionable, you can't just like, if you're not in person, you can't just like check, wait, what do you mean by that?
Are you taking notes?
I'm not like a professional debater and a professional historian or a scholar, so I've seen debaters where they're always jotting down certain things. And if I do these more, I see that done as a tactic. But
Well,
I'm also
to
yeah.
remain present, to be like, remember that,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
now go back into being present.
In this one, I wasn't taking notes. I was trying to kind
Hmm.
of listen and track and whatever. And also, like when there's so much to say, you
Yeah,
can easily draw a blank and
and
be like, and you're conscious of that.
yeah,
So, yeah, you want to have an authentic, real conversation and also know that you're trying to convey a certain point of view that you truly feel. And you don't want to sell that short and you don't want to miss things. But it's so funny. Some of the feedback I'm getting that's like critical is like, why didn't you say the talking point I wanted to say? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you go ahead and do it. Like,
right,
I would have said that. I'm like, yeah, you would have really in real time. You would have said that.
right.
Everybody, and you always have
Yeah.
after the fact, like, I should have. That's really the better answer that I've worked out, but in real time, it didn't come to me. But at the end of the day, like, there's definitely certain things that he said that, like, I'm reflecting back on that I was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. But I
Mhm.
wasn't able to parse it in real time because there was a lot of sophisticated like conflation of language going on that Dave used, like
Yeah.
legal language that I don't
Mhm.
think was applicable or comparable. And we can unpack that. But at the end of the day, I messaged him like, good chat, very formidable. Thanks for engaging. He said, absolutely, you too. Thanks for doing it. And I'd be happy to have him on with us at some point. And
Yeah.
actually, in a more interview style setting, um, hash those things out in those positions. Because at the end of the day, my thing on Dave is that I think he's very well informed and well intentioned and really has read a lot of the literature on this, but he draws such a wrong conclusion at the end of the day and has such a confidence and almost an arrogance by which he believes this should go and pays very little consequence for those positions because he's not really involved in the conflict in that way. He could sort of say the same about me, I guess, but at the end of the day, you're constantly like trying to be present while also being like, well, if I say this, then he says this, and then we say this. So it's like chess, intellectual chess. At the end of the day, how did I do? I leave that for everyone else to decide. But the fact that I think he's more experienced than me in this regard, like holding my own and being able to, present the best that I could, there were certain things I wish I was more present for and more fluid about. But I don't know. I
The
think I
most
got through it.
impressive thing to me is when I'm listening to him talk, and I'm thinking, well, what would I say next? And I
Mm-hmm.
have no idea what to say. The fact that words come out of your mouth, honestly, I'm like, oh, Ami's very good at this, because I wouldn't even know where to start, because a lot of these debates also, it's not really a question being asked. It's not even like a fully formed opinion or like a fully accurate opinion. So I'm just like, where do you even start with that? But like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you not draw a blank? Like when he, like, for instance, with the
Yeah. Give me an example.
with the when he threw that quote at you from like Dovi
Mm-hmm.
Gleisman or something, like the
Right.
Netanyahu's special advisor.
Yeah.
And like your mind just goes into a million different places, and you're like, first of all, I've never heard that quote. I don't know who that person is. I guess it's true because he's saying it. Like
I'll tell you what it
where
is.
did you start with that answer?
So when he threw that quote at me, I'm like, sometimes you address the point head on, and sometimes you have to consider it, but also at the end of the day, what I think I was trying to get at was what Destiny said in his review. If you watched it, was it's completely irrelevant. Who cares if that's the reason they wanted to pull out? They did pull out.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the most concise response. And my whole thing was I was in Israel that year when the disengagement happened. There were so many people in Israel who believed genuinely that this would be a pathway to peace. They did pull out. They took out 8,000 settlers and change and their graves from this place, which, by the way, what we're saying is has to be Jew free for this to work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe has to be completely Jew free. And he sort of set me up when he said, why do you think they did it? And I'm like, that's what? I thought
Right.
that's what you wanted them to do it. What do you mean? Why do you think they did it? So he had something in the back pocket from I don't know if it was Wikipedia or whatever, but it was it was reading off something, but that's fine. He was reading a quote, and I was trying to process new information sort of in real time about this other alternate agenda. And the real answer I would have given upon further reflecting on that point was that he was like, "This halts the peace process. This is what we want, and this will halt the peace process." And Destiny had an interesting thing was like, who cares why they did it? They did it. My response now would be there was never a peace process. So stop telling yourself that this is the thing that will halt it. It was an illusion to begin with. I think personally, this idea is that there was this peace process between these two peoples when it was all an illusion we tell ourselves in the West, that we're presuming that this is about land and just geographical disputes. Like, that's to me the fundamental answer to that question. It's like, you think that's what halted the peace process, was this disengagement under disingenuous motivations?
Right.
The whole peace process itself doesn't exist. It's a total myth that we tell ourselves in the West. And I think because this is rooted not in the desire to create two states. It's against the cultural and deeply rooted in Islam that if you once conquered a land and was Islamic, it can never be non-Islamic. So this whole thing, it's kind of like on the Rabbi Manis episode. It's like, that's erroneous. It's completely irrelevant. So that's, on all accounts, that doesn't halt the peace process. That didn't quite come to me because that was sort of new information. I'm like, of what he was bringing up, and what strikes me about Dave is like, he jumps and he lights up at when any Israeli politician is caught on a hot mic saying something whispery, but ignores all the overt stuff coming from the other side on hot mics every single day.
I actually really liked your answer of like, yeah, especially when I just said that. And guess what? Like the actual leader of Hamas says about Israel. Like, I thought that was a good answer. So are you like freaking out when you're like listening to him talk? Are you having like a minor panic attack at any point and like have to calm yourself down?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I watch back to it and I'm like, how did I answer that question? There's this like, I think sometimes if you're asking me strategically, like what's going on, I understand the disengagement differently, completely differently. And even one point that's like kind of out of left field can't change my fundamental perception unless it's hard to do that in real time anyway. But I understand this notion that Israel did pull out. And did you see what he said? And when they pulled out, what happened? They started doing all these things like securing the border and making sure weapons and stuff weren't coming in, again stripping all agency and accountability. And I went to the point, I'm like, Netanyahu did not cause Hamas to come in and slaughter Fatah and then change and did not cause the curriculum in Palestinian schools. We don't have to deliberate the conversation, but like those are for me, a lot of the conversation fundamentally, and I never lose sight of my outline, is that fundamental and marginal issues, whatever politicians operate and get corrupt in an environment, could be true. I'm not going to deny it if I haven't heard it before, if it's something to consider, but it doesn't change to me. He still hasn't addressed the fundamental issue, Jew hatred and a denial of Jewish sovereignty in the Muslim world, versus the marginal issues of how politicians operate in that context. And he's so hyper-focused on that. What's driving this problem is is all the marginal issues. That's my fundamental thing. So even new information, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just like, yeah, I'm considering how to respond to it, but I'm also just trying to listen to that. And yeah, you're trying to listen. Yeah. I don't know. At the end of the day, if you're very honest in real time, you can kind of flesh that out and talk about it. But I didn't like how he conflated all of Israel because some leader in Israeli politics has a quote that this was the sentiment in Israel. The sentiment in Israel in a lot of ways was split and divided. And a lot of people thought giving back land would help. Doesn't change the agency, you know?
Were there any other points you wish you would have made? Like any other parts where watching back, like what? I
mean, when we got into the weeds about hostages and negotiating and stuff like that, there was one thing.
Did they bring up hostages?
Oh, yeah.
Did he bring up hostages?
Yeah. He said something about like, he gave an example of like, if a bank robber, someone took a hostage, what would we do to get the hostage
that was
back?
So I'll get into my opinion about it, but yeah.
When he said that, we would not go and blow up the place. And I sort of said like, no, the responsibility of a government is to protect its own civilians, so they wouldn't destroy the whole place. But then I said like, he drew an analogy of that to say, he said something like, better to let our legal youth. I said, I brought up the idea of hostage exchange for prisoner exchange.
The conviction thing.
Yeah, I said the word conviction, just like talking loosely, but the truth is I'm not sure how it's processed there. That's not quite the point. This presumption is they don't have jurisprudence and they don't have a due process and all these things. my point was how they adjudicate that stuff in the West Bank when they arrest Palestinians. My point was the Palestinians, the reason they're arrested is not because of their identity, it's because of their actions. They've committed violent crimes, so they're arrested. They're not taken hostage or kidnapped. And I was trying to just to draw a distinction between that and hostage takers. And then when I said in terms of exchange and why that's a terrible thing, I was trying to ask him, do you think that's a good thing to exchange one hostage for 1,000 prisoners? He said, absolutely. It's the foundation of Western civilization. Better to let one innocent person go free than what's the phrase? He said, better to let one guilty man go free than 1,000 innocent people go to jail. Something along those lines. Like, that's how our justice system works.
Not and literally, though.
No, he's like, better to let one.
He said,
like, right? That's the phrase. Better to let 10 guilty men go free than one innocent person go to jail. That's like
something like
closer
that.
To the phrase. But these aren't 10 presumed guilty or presumed innocent people. We know what these prisoners have done. Like, well, they in other words,
I'm not going to argue the point, but
no, in a court of law, presumed innocence and we presume innocent until proven guilty because we don't know. But in a lot of these cases, we're talking about violent criminals who've stabbed Israelis at cafes or tried to commit violent acts, so they've been arrested and detained. That's not the same thing as in a court of law when we're adjudicating who's guilty and who's innocent. We know hostages being taken are innocent.
Right.
And even though there hasn't maybe been a preceding trial like we know of in the West of the typical standard, Israelis are arresting people who've committed violent actions already. So what I wanted to ask him as one follow-up to that, and sometimes you can't because the conversation keeps moving, is, and what if, Dave, that hostage taker asked for 1,000 violent criminals to be released? Would you think we should do that? Should the police say, okay? What if he asked for 1,000 terrorists to be released and to let that hostage go? Like, because he's like, absolutely, just negotiate. We negotiate. That's what we do. And I'm just, and then I didn't take it further. I'm like, well, we'll follow that to its logical conclusion. Like, what if he asked for 1,000 prisoners to be released who were guilty of violent crimes? Mm-hmm. Like, then the devil's in the details when you just say negotiating is the only way.
He also, like, for a libertarian, he has like a lot of like policies of how things should be done, not just like let the situation evolve as it should.
Yeah. And I mean, we can get into him. I think we can get into him specifically, and I have questions for him because of and his positions. I'd love to save that for an episode where we talk to him one-on-one. I think it could be productive. Enough. But anyway,
were there any other points though that you wanted
to? Yes. I think when he said, like, at the end of the day, there have always been atrocities committed by governments and regimes, and there will always be people who rationalize it. And I would have just said back to him, if I could, having the last word, I completely agree. Who's rationalizing who here, buddy? And that's the truth. Mm-hmm. Who are the monsters here? And in his mind, there's this weird, like, he didn't like the word moral equivalence, but accountability. Like, you hear one guy whisper on a hot mic and suddenly all governments are evil because they're governments and they're evil. Right. And, I was like, I agree. There's always people who rationalize the behavior of monsters. This is all a matter of degree here. And that would have been interesting, but can't always have the last word. It just doesn't work that way.
Is there anything you would have said to Candace that you didn't get to say or think to say?
I think there was a little more historical context that could have been established in the narrative dispute about Palestinian displacement. At one point he said, you want to talk about the fundamental issue is that a bunch of white European Jews violently evicted 750,000 some odd Palestinians or whatever. And at one point I misunderstood his timeline because I thought he was talking about 48 and on. He actually wasn't. Mm-hmm. He was talking about before that in the Zionist project, but he ignores a totally separate account of history in which emigration to the land of Palestine before the establishment of the state of Israel was happening constantly in irrigation and land purchases and like legal leasing of land from absentee landlords. There was so much of that was going on leading up to that. And why were Jews emigrating to Palestine? Because they were getting a lot of shit everywhere in the world from the 1880s, first Aliyah. Like there's all that history and wonkiness. And it's hard. You want to keep it to like now because at the end of the day, Dave does concede and accept like they pulled it off. He thinks it's not he thinks it was wrong in a sense, but he says they won. Okay, they won. They pulled it off. I'm only arguing for the last 22%. And I kept so like it's like why get into all the history if at the end of the day he accepts what he accepts, right? So like it could be a waste of time, but it's good to establish, I think, for Candace's sake and learning about it, that why was it called Palestine? Like what does the name Palestine come from? Like ancient Rome, expelling of the Jews. Not to say I'm not talking about giving them a modern claim now, but where does it come from? Like I tried to dispel a couple of myths about this conflict or misunderstandings that I presume she had.
I thought you did well there, and also and I think something important you mentioned is like they weave this story like one day the Palestinians woke up with a knock at their door and saying like, "Hey, you guys gotta go."
Mm-hmm.
It was like there was a war happening.
Yeah,
like this was in the midst of a war where communities were turning on themselves, and like there was it was. And I thought you did a nice job of that, and also saying like this, like the hatred didn't develop starting in 1948. It was there.
I'll tell you the one thing.
There,
and I'll bring it. I would bring it up to Dave again. It was like he's like, you would hate your oppressors too. You would hate your occupiers too, just like they do. And I would have asked him, just asked, like, then why didn't Palestinians attack Jordanians from 1948 to 1967? And why didn't the Palestinians in Gaza attack Egyptians with terrorism from 1948 to 67? A brutal 20-year occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, not made part of Jordan and not made part of Egypt, living under occupation with no rights. Why did they not attack their occupiers then? Oh, because they weren't Jews, you know? Like, I think that would have dispelled
Great
that.
question.
And that would have been that would have been my question. If that's your contention, why didn't they attack their occupiers when there was no occupation by Jews?
Right. I would have loved to hear you ask that.
Now, the problem with getting too much into the history is like I admittedly not a historian or a scholar. I'm not Benny Morris here, so I'm not coming into this like to, because that conversation can end or derail really quick. With he's got stuff he's read, I've got stuff I've read, and we're done. I'm trying to like keep it. At some point, we try to just focus on the here and now of what's moral and what's good and what seems right. And weird declaratives like Israel doesn't have to do this.
Yeah, I like that. I liked your approach there too.
What? I was like, can you imagine a situation where you actually have ruled something out and now the choices are between bad and worse? Can you imagine that? I forgot what he answered, but look, at the end of the day, I think I was encouraged by the fact that like I think Dave made some concessions that he never would have made in other bad faith arguments, but was maybe more willing to make with me because we had a good faith discussion. Like Hamas is a death cult. And in a way, there's something a little more evil intuitively when we witness what they do versus with what Israel does, or the barbarians on October 7th versus, even though murder is wrong, someone who has an abortion, it doesn't feel as wrong, even though to him, soldiers in Iraq are murderers too, which I think is kind of odd. But he does kind of believe that in principle. No matter where it happens, murder is murder. And I think I'm like, your moral intuitions there kind of tell you something, Dave. He's kind of ignoring that. He's saying that's kind of an illusion philosophically. So I'm trying to understand that. He's like, technically the Iraqi soldiers being propagandized, but he's still murdering people. And Israel's dropping a bomb, still murdering people. First degree murder.
He sounds a
Long
little...
Island mama. He sounds like a Long Island mom.
But, he does.
But I enjoy that. But in a good faith discussion to get to that point of like, and he even said that with that heavy moment when he said, I would do, if somebody hurt my kid, I would do terrible things then. But
I thought that was effective. It was effective, yeah.
Effective for who though? For him or for me? I guess both, because it doesn't matter.
I forgot what his point was, but I remember it.
His point was almost, if you sympathize with my position, it makes my point strong, and if you sympathize with his, it makes his point strong. If you're a Palestinian who's lost loved ones to Israel, you do whatever to hurt them.
Right.
And if you're Israel who's lost loved ones on October 7th or have kidnapped kids, you do whatever to hurt them. If I took the bait on that point and followed up, like, so therefore Israel's just, he's like, I'm not saying I'd be just in my actions. I'm just saying what I would do. It doesn't mean it's right. And I didn't take the bait on, like, I get it. That's the emotional argument. But I think there's a different argument to be had about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know. What's your take?
Um,
Without trying to or analyze all of
yeah,
Dave's points, just the spirit of it.
I thought you did a really competent, solid job.
Mm-hmm.
I was proud of you.
Thanks.
Um, I was. Why?
Yeah.
uh,
It's hard to hear sincerity, but I take it.
I thought you did a good job. I can't imagine how poorly I would have done. So,
Okay.
like knowing that you're not a professional doing this, I thought you did a really decent job. Um, and and you compose, and it's the way you compose yourself, I think, is really impressive. I don't know how. I can hardly follow it, and like I don't think I'm a dumb person, but I have a hard time comprehending these things sometimes because like it's not like a real conversation, and like
Mm.
the way that you follow it, I think, is impressive.
There's an
Um,
improv element to it that I think it taps into because conversation is kind of improvisational. So maybe that's why two comedians are kind of good at it. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. No, it's just
um,
it's like the amount of facts it's not always all leading up to one point. It's like
mhm.
several different things that are being made at once, and like the proper response isn't actually responding to what he's saying, but responding to sort of his intention of like what he's going for in order to keep this whole performance going on. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, or you're gonna get like a Lex Fridman thing that goes 6 hours, and that's not what these things are. So like, I'm
No.
just I'm like, I don't even know what to say here.
That's why
So
questions can be helpful. Questions
yeah,
can be helpful, and
yeah.
I would have liked more of those. I have more questions for
So
him.
so that was you. I thought the entire exercise of having um, a hostess who has no idea what she's talking about, talking to two comedians who are not experts or historians
Mhm.
is just kind of like this absurd moment in 2024, and like it's just like it's funny. Like
Mhm.
you were asked to do it. I think it's cool that you accepted, but because why not? If not you, it's going to be someone else. But
Mhm.
the whole thing was like, why isn't Einat Wolf talking to a Palestinian historian? Like, why aren't we having
Well,
two people who know the
w-
facts and can really and really know the history here?
well, there is plenty of that, but there's also maybe room to just talk about to the extent that you know things
Mm-hmm.
like
Okay.
the way you would. I think what the podcast world is, Michael,
Mm-hmm.
right, is like the Rogan non-expert world discussing cool ideas.
Right, but I mean, I personally have soured on that a lot since
Uh-huh.
October 7th
Yeah.
because it's not. I mean, looking back on the Rogan COVID response now, I think he's aged better than most people on the subject. But you know, I'm a little bit like, you know, when he has a comedian on to talk about Hamas, I'm like, this is dangerous
Mhm.
and silly and not constructive, and the same way where he had like some doctor who had some kind of credential talking about COVID, I think in retrospect probably was more dangerous and more silly than I gave it credit for.
Or you're just saying that you sympathize with how they felt then in the medical community about how we feel now in the
Yeah,
pro-Israel
well,
Jewish community.
that is what I'm saying. Yeah, that is what I'm saying.
Except that the week after a comedian, Joe, had Coleman Hughes.
Yeah, he has both.
So I'm just like, great. And the week after, like he had Sanjay Gupta on after that guy,
Right.
who did a piss poor job.
But Candace is not having
Not
two
yet.
serious historians. I hope she does.
I hope so
I hope
too.
she does.
And
So
that's my thing. Like, have Douglas on and next, or Victor Davis Hansen,
yeah.
or Prager, or people like and to the Young Turks' credit, like I think they do that kind of stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
They'll have people on. Um, so is it mutually exclusive? I guess is what I'm saying.
Um, is it? No, it's not mutually exclusive.
Right.
As long as you're also doing the other thing. Um,
For
then
your liking. It's just that the idea is like
no, it's
this.
not. It's not just for my liking because this is where people are getting their information,
Right. Right.
and
But
like I wish you. So my next point is I know this isn't your thing and you're not a professional debater, but like I wish you if you
were
did no if you did all the research, you would be so much more formidable. If you were able to say that's not what happened in 48, here's what happened in 48, or like, yeah, that is a quote. You know who else said this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you know what else he? I
These are
just
lost. I feel those missed opportunities given my, but it's not my area of expertise. And I spoke to one of our previous guests today
I
about
mean,
it. I spoke to one of our
yeah.
previous guests today about it. Nachman, I'll tell you about it later.
Well,
And
well,
he was like, "Listen, I got to tell you some things." But I hear you because
well,
it's a missed opportunity to expose a certain ignorance
but
that
but
it
but
may not be at my disposal because I'm not an expert, but
but but
I have
but,
my
but,
position.
but even more so, I know how normally informed you are on this.
Mhm.
You're just a normal guy.
Yeah.
I think Dave Smith is no more informed than you, but he's learned a way to sound informed
Mm.
by taking a couple of quotes and like I don't think Dave Smith really knows what he's talking about. I don't think anyone who listens to him talk knows what he's talking about. And this is my opinion, not yours.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you're gonna be upset at me for saying this. I think he's one of the dumbest smart people like I've ever
Mm.
heard talk on the topic. I think he's kind of an idiot, but he knows how to sound really smart. I don't think anything he said was very intelligent or well informed or accurate. But I think he did a really good job. Like I he even
Michael,
like
we want him to come on the
I'll
show.
say it to him. I'll say it to him too.
I
Like
know, I know.
I'll say it to him too. I
I'm
mean,
not sure about that though. That's saying you're revealed in his performance. Was that to you? That's the impression you got.
yes.
Um,
Yes, but he's very good. Like he even like got me a little bit being like wondering about some
yeah.
stuff. Like not to say he's not effective, but like having two people. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of done with that point. Just like I thought he was, yeah, just inconsistent with his values and
Mhm.
not very well informed. And I would really like to talk to him about like
Yeah.
where his opinions come from because they don't seem very libertarian to me.
Right.
Um,
Well, here, think about it this way. If you completely discard the culture and religion and theological roots of this, right? And you presume everybody just wants the same thing and his belief in natural rights means, I think Dave Smith is an anarcho-capitalist. I don't
what's
think he
that?
believes he's an anarchist. He doesn't believe in the legitimacy of any governments. And I can tell because of interviews I've watched with him. And if you listen to the very beginning, he said, and listen, governments, to the extent that there should even be governments, their job is to. Now, nobody would say that. I know libertarians well because I used to be one. No, I kind of still am. But I know the libertarian literature and the different strains. And you sort of have like conservatarian libertarians who aren't naive on foreign policy and are aware of, and you have the Ayn Rand kind of libertarians. They reject that. They don't like that label. But like the
Mhm.
small government community, generally speaking, from
Yeah.
conservatives to libertarians to objectivists, when it comes to certain areas, they are divided. Abortion, foreign policy, they all agree taxes should be very low, if not non-existent. A lot of them agree on like separation of government from the economy, church and state, those kinds of things. But on foreign policy, there's a strain of isolationists like Ron Paul, um, uh, isolationist Ron Paul sort of libertarians that are anti-war almost in all cases, and that America's just as bad, and that any government
Mhm.
is sort of like it's sort of anarcho-capitalism, meaning everything should be private, even the military, even force. The state is coercive and therefore evil, and I think he believes that, and therefore, any nation state to him, once they cross over into coercive government,
Mhm. So
possesses a certain evil, and it's just matters
right.
of degree. America's better than Iraq, but they're just as murderous and
Right.
oppressive when you think about it,
And
even if
s-
they're not to their own people.
and
So
so to him, the Palestinians are more righteous because they don't have as big of a government.
no, not that, not because they have less of a government, but to him, it's all
Or
about the individuals within the society, and there's no such thing as binding ideology or culture that's actually animating them. It's just a bunch of individuals who want natural rights and freedoms and want to live in freedom in a voluntary society if given the chance. And he completely ignores the main thing animating the entire region in the conflict, which is the
right,
theological,
right.
ideological roots.
So
So for him as a libertarian, that's where it's consistent. If
so
you
so
ignore this massive issue that
so
is the
that gets
core
me
of
to
it.
my next point. I think that I was trying to figure out how to say this, but Destiny said it really well. Is he seems like he stopped paying attention to the news on October 6th.
Mhm.
where he was making points like, sure, they say river to the sea, but come on, that's not a real thing. And yeah, sure, if some guy is just pointing his gun at you and saying, I'm going to kill you, you can't take them seriously. And it's like, did you see what happened on October
Mhm.
7th? Like with those people who were saying, I'm going to kill you. And
Mhm.
it's this weird naivete of
Yeah. I
what would happen if there were two states side by side. And it's really odd to me that he's still making those points.
yeah.
It's
And
almost like
those are the questions I would have.
disqualifies him from having these conversations to me.
And I was like, my other main question I didn't really get a chance to ask is, like, what are you fighting for? What are you
Mm-hmm.
fighting for? Do you think a free Palestine would be free? Like, values wise, on that question, like,
Mm-hmm.
what are you fighting for? And I know the response that if I'm playing devil's advocate, it's like, that's irrelevant. They're being subject to a brutal occupation by Israel. Whatever they decide to do, I would object to that if it ends up being corrupt too. But you can't say that excuses Israel's occupation, calling it the occupation. So that's like, I know you can kind of ping pong it in your own mind a little bit of what, but at the end of the day, it's a strange way to sympathize if you have such strong libertarian values
Mm-hmm.
of freedom and all that.
Yeah.
And I said that at the beginning, and he said, like, whatever you feel about the country doesn't matter. It's about what they're doing to other countries. Like, and that's a good point. But again, it's really highlighting what seems to be very much ignored in his position. It's a good point in that, like, I feel that America's really good to its citizens, way better than Iraq is good to its. But does that mean America gets to go to Iraq and butcher their civilians? You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's what he's saying. That's what the core of the issue is. The occupation is what's fueling everything. And I'd say, no. Why is there a military occupation in the West Bank?
Yeah.
What's happening? What's causing it? What's perpetuating it?
Right.
That's the fundamental crux of our disagreement.
Right. So for somebody so well informed, he doesn't seem to have any interest in like learning about the population or what they want or like the culture. Then I just have two more points. One is, who taught Candace Owens the word interject? Because she just kept saying it, which I found very annoying.
Okay.
And then the last thing is, her closing statement was the most condescending thing I've ever heard. When she addressed Jews and told them it's okay to have other opinions,
Yeah.
I thought that was infuriating.
I know it was. I knew it was, and I knew that I knew that there was more to be said on that to come.
It shows really to me, and you don't have to comment on this, but her lack of self-awareness on this topic.
Well, I can explain it. I can explain where it comes from. I think where it comes from is she identifies with the anti-Zionist Jewish person, because to her, she was disqualified as a black person for speaking out against BLM, establishment black narrative in the United States. And the African American narrative was that this is a systemically racist society. These are the claims we are making. All white people are racist and oppressors. And this is the claim we are making. This is the doctrine. This is the dogma. And if you're black, you must accept this. And if you're not, you're an Uncle Tom. You're a traitor to your community. So she sees what's going on with the Israel-Palestine conflict, and she says, if you're a Jewish person in Boca Raton, you don't have to go along with this narrative of supporting this foreign nation. And it's completely wrong. It's connecting all the wrong dots. It's completely wrong, but that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from, I know it's condescending, but and it's Jew-splaining in a way, if you call it that, but I don't even like these terms. Like, she can have a misinformed position on it, and she does.
No. It's. I think I understand where it's coming from, and it's informative. If you want to be mad at her, you can, but just listen to her say that, and you're like, is it worth being mad at this person? This is is her context for this. So like, do with that what you please.
And that's what I've been saying. Like, and as we'll see in the coming weeks, like what's to come. Like, her and I prompted another conversation. This conversation with Dave Smith was sort of tacked onto it, but as we'll see, there's more to be discussed that we can comment on later that will be discussed. And anger and reactionary behavior on our part, on the part of the Jewish community. I don't like speaking like that in broad strokes, but at the same time, that might be the wrong approach. Like, when you hear things that infuriate you or whatever, you can go and write articles and give yourself a pat on the back and call it out to each other. I don't know if that's the best way. It depends on what you're looking at. Like, try to figure out what you're looking at and what you're hearing first. And you could get angry and be like, oh, but we can get into a machlokas here. And we're open to that. And we could step into the room and say, well, you know. So I'm not defending anything, but I'm just saying, what do you do in response?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do you do in response to objectionable words and claims
Yeah.
and ideas that are really offensive or misguided, ignorant? What do you do? Because to say it's all hateful, I get it, but that assumes intent, that you really know what's going on in somebody's heart. And I totally understand it. And I probably would if I hadn't been, and I totally understand that sentiment, you know? But the question is, at least so far, like, the more speech is better, you know, more speech, not less. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. I'm hopeful that this conversation, what was that?
I
I'm
don't
hopeful
know.
this conversation, this first instance of this conversation going back for round 2 demonstrated that. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it demonstrated that?
I mean, I can't take all the credit for you going on the show, but I didn't think. I mean, you were worried. I think it's good that you went on.
Yeah.
I think it will only lead to more positive outcomes, as opposed to isolating ourselves from
Right.
this freaking rocket ship that is
Yeah.
taking off.
Right.
And I think it's cool that you're in that position and you're handling it delicately and wisely and well. And I wouldn't do that, but I think it's cool that you are.
Thank you. I think I was encouraged by the first point of agreement when I talked about the anti-Semitism catch-22 of, you hear things that are anti-Semitic, so we call it out, and then they say, you see, Jews control the narrative. And Dave agreed with me. He's like, there's this sense that Jews can't win.
That was
I've been all the comments when the video first aired were, oh, looky, 2 Jews controlling the conversation. They were so anti-Semitic. It was hilarious. I was like, oh, well, there you go.
You look at the comments on our Rabbi Manis Friedman reel, a YouTube short of you looping for him. It's like free Palestine. You suck.
It came out. It's all
you sucked at Candace, but it's like I mean, it's all blending into one thing.
So the spirit of, if you can dish it out and you could take it, like, if someone can take it, like, give it, like, go and see, depending, and figure out what's going on before we draw conclusions and start patting ourselves on the back and virtue signal to ourselves to say, like, we're solving the problem. You know what I mean? By writing articles to ourselves, calling out objectionable speech, and then we say, love that article. Yeah. Glad you called it out. I don't know. Made a video. Glad you called it out. Did you call it out? Did you really address it? Or did you comfort ourselves in a little silo here?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not defending anything said by Candace in the past or whatever, but the point is, tactically speaking, how do you approach stuff that you find disagreeable, to say the least? Mm-hmm. Problematic. What do? More speech, not less. She says that in the episode. That part I agree with. So we'll see how this pans out.
It's going. The views are doing pretty good.
Yeah,
people are watching it.
Yeah,
and
Holy God, what is happening?
Maybe you shouldn't have done it. I don't know.
Oh, stop.
Shoot.
But I don't know. To be continued.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this post-game unpacking with me.
Yeah. You got it. And if you're still listening, check out our Patreon. Mm-hmm. Putting up some cool stuff up there. We put up a conversation about this and Brianna Joy Gray, the Candace versus her, and putting up some fun stuff up there. And Patreon's been growing. It's been exciting.
All right, guys, keep following. Become a patron. Become a guest of Ami's house. It's a weird thing. These kind of things are happening. This is prime time, baby. Reporting back from the Lion's Den. Glad to be unpacking this with you, Michael. And thanks for being Michael was my go-to throughout all of this and has been throughout all these pre-debates. I always call my co-host over here for a little bit of strength to draw off of and perspective to find out exactly what not to do. Because I take his advice and I say, no, not that.
Don't go on Candace. Don't talk about October 7th, bro.
Brianna Joy Gray, you're like, oh, don't do that. Oh, no.
Was I right? I might have been right about that one.
Nah, I turned her brain into a pretzel. It was fine.
I guess so.
Anyway, that's Ami's house. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Stay tuned.